You are just in time, Ziva said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She sat at the long mahogany table next to Carmel. Across from them, Alpha Melek occupied the head of the table. He was a silver-haired man from the older generation who had always treated Kavi and Carmel like his own nephews. His presence was the only thing keeping the two brothers from a physical brawl over who deserved the seat of honor. Liora felt Kavi's hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the empty chairs. The room felt heavy. Even with the delicious scent of roasted steak in the air, the atmosphere tasted like old grudges. We were just talking about the children, Ziva continued, smoothing her silk napkin. They will be arriving soon. I am worried, though. The air here feels a bit too humid. Kavi pulled out a chair for Liora, his movements smooth and deliberate. He didn't look at Ziva, but Liora could feel the tension radiating off him. I do not know about Joel, but Kalila is sensitive to the temperature, Ziva sighed. She leaned back, casting a look of feigned pity toward Liora. The poor child has not been the same since that terrible incident with the wolfsbane. It was such a tragedy. The table went dead silent. The mention of the poisoning, the very thing that had led to Liora's banishment, hung in the air like a thick fog. Ziva gasped softly, tapping her lips with a finger. Oh, I am so sorry, Ziva whispered, though her eyes remained sharp. I should not have brought that up. I just get so worried about Kalila. And Carmel, too. He was so devastated to see his daughter hurt. I never want to see him that heartbroken again. Liora looked at Carmel. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed into a thin, pale line. He stared at his plate, refusing to meet Liora's gaze. Liora felt her own hands curl into fists under the table. Ziva was marking her territory, reminding everyone at the table why Liora had been cast out. You are such a gentleman now, Kavi, Shira interrupted, clapping her hands to break the silence. She beamed at the couple. You have found yourself a good one, Liora. Carmel stiffened. His shoulders squared, and his grip on his silver fork tightened until his knuckles turned white. Everyone knew Liora had once been his wife, and hearing his brother praised for winning her over clearly stung. Liora forced a bright, plastic smile. She reached out and placed her hand over Kavi's for everyone to see. He is a darling, Shira. Truly. Kavi didn't hesitate. He turned his hand over, sliding his fingers between hers and squeezing gently. The possessive heat of his palm was a stark contrast to the cold energy coming from Carmel. You are a lucky woman, Ziva added, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Everyone knows what a menace Kavi used to be. To think you were the one to finally tame him. He broke so many hearts in high school, Shira laughed, trying to keep the mood light. He was almost expelled. Alpha Melek chuckled, finally cutting into his steak. He was not any better in college, believe me. The conversation drifted into safer territory for a few minutes, but Liora couldn't relax. She could feel Ziva's eyes on her, waiting for the next opening to strike. It didn't take long. I was so concerned when I heard the rumors about Alpha Malik, Ziva said, her voice casual, as if she were discussing the weather. People say Kavi shot the heir of the Barca pack and sent him to the emergency room. Kavi continued to eat his dinner with calm precision. He looked like a man who didn't have a care in the world, even though he was the center of the gossip. Liora's grip on her fork became white-knuckled. She wanted to tell Ziva to be quiet, but Kavi beat her to it. Do not be silly, Shira said, waving a hand. Those are just rumors. Alpha Assassin would have started a war if that were true. It is true, Kavi said. The sound of silverware hitting ceramic echoed through the room. Melek stopped chewing. Liora looked at Kavi in shock. It is? Melek asked, his voice low and uncertain. I shot him, Kavi confirmed. He took a sip of his wine, looking completely bored. In the thigh. You shot Malik? Carmel hissed, leaning across the table. His eyes were wide with fury. Are you out of your mind? Are you trying to drag the Elon pack into a war? Kavi shrugged. That is old news, Carmel. No need to get worked up. He got on my nerves. He was talking trash about my wife. Liora felt her heart skip. His wife. Even if it was just for show, the way he said it sounded terrifyingly real. No one gets away with that, Kavi continued. His gaze shifted slowly, landing directly on Ziva. His eyes were cold and predatory. He asked for it. It took a lot of self-control not to blow his brains out. Before you keep watching, hit the notification below. Don't forget to like, comment and share. Ziva shrank back into her seat, her face turning pale. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the upholstery. But Liora does not like me killing people, Kavi added, his voice softening just a fraction as he looked at her. So, I try to be forgiving. Hence the thigh shot. The rest of the dinner was a blur of awkward silences and forced small talk. The tension was so thick it felt like it was choking her. Finally, Liora stood up. Please excuse me, she murmured. I need some air. She didn't wait for an answer. She hurried toward the stairs, but she didn't go to her bedroom. She needed space. She walked down the long hallway toward the open balcony that overlooked the lake. The water shimmered under the moonlight like a sheet of silver. Liora leaned against the stone railing, breathing in the crisp night air. Memories she had tried to bury began to surface. She remembered swimming in this lake with Carmel years ago. He loved the cold, and she had learned to love it for him. They had been happy here, once. Then she thought of Kavi. He had risked a war with another pack just because someone spoke ill of her. Was it all an act? The floorboards creaked behind her. Liora didn't turn around. Kavi was always following her, always watching. Still pretending you do not remember, Liora? The voice was a low whisper, but it didn't belong to Kavi. It was Carmel. Liora gasped and started to turn, but he stepped closer, his hands gripping the railing on either side of her, trapping her against his chest. Do not, he whispered near her ear. Not yet. Liora froze. His cheek brushed against hers, a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. He smelled of cedar and the cold lake air, a scent she had known for a lifetime. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against him and burying his face in her hair. He took a shaky breath, his hold tightening. Liora's mind raced. Kavi was just downstairs. Ziva was just downstairs. Go back to your wife, Carmel, Liora said. She forced her voice to be cold, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Carmel let out a bitter, dry laugh. And you will go back to my brother? Liora didn't answer. She used her strength to wrench herself away from him, stepping to the side so she could finally look at him. He looked haunted in the moonlight. I know you are wondering, Carmel said, his voice trailing off as he looked out at the water. It was not my idea to come here, Liora. But the moment I stepped back inside these walls, I knew. Knew what? Liora asked. Carmel didn't look at her. He began to back away, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. To me, this is a sign, he said. He turned and walked back into the darkness of the hallway, leaving Liora alone in the cold. A sign of what, Carmel? The door creaked open with a slow, heavy groan. Kavi stepped into the room, swirling a glass of clear vodka. He looked relaxed, his tie loosened at the collar. Liora sat on the edge of the bed, her laptop resting on her knees as she sifted through a pile of unread emails. She looked up and raised an eyebrow at the drink. I only had one glass, Kavi said, as if he could read the judgment in her eyes. I'm not going to spend our first night together tipsy. Liora let out a soft scoff. Kavi always seemed to find his own meaning in her silence. She looked back at her screen, clicking through a few more tabs. Did I mention how beautiful you look tonight, my dear wife? Kavi asked. He flashed a quick wink that didn't quite reach his eyes. We're alone now, Liora replied, her voice flat. You can drop the act. Kavi chuckled under his breath. He closed the door behind him, the latch clicking shut with finality. He walked toward the bed and set his glass down on the dark wood of the nightstand. For our own sanity, I think we had best get used to the act for the rest of the week, he said. Liora didn't look up, but her fingers paused over the keyboard. She wondered if he was suggesting they pretend to be a happy couple even when the world wasn't watching. Kavi didn't offer an explanation, and she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of asking for one. The room fell quiet, save for the rustle of fabric. Kavi began to undress, moving with a calm confidence that made Liora keep her eyes glued to her screen. When he was down to just his pants, he turned his gaze toward her. Carmel and I are meeting Melek in the morning, Kavi said, his voice dropping into a businesslike tone. There is a meeting with a few other alphas. My granddad called while you were busy. He wants you and Ziva to join Shira. You'll be picking out the food for the summit. It seems the last arrangement fell through. Liora frowned, her typing becoming more aggressive. Convenient. The thought of being trapped in a room with Ziva all day made her stomach turn. It was the last thing she wanted to deal with on top of everything else. Do you want to switch places? Kavi asked, tilting his head. Liora knew exactly what he was implying. After her run-in with Carmel earlier, the last person she wanted to discuss was him. She ignored the question entirely and snapped her laptop shut. She stood up, clutching the device to her chest. Will you take the couch, or should I? She asked. Kavi's brow furrowed. Instead of answering, he reached over and pulled back the heavy covers of the bed. He climbed in and settled against the pillows. Liora felt a surge of irritation and turned toward the door. Fine. I'll take the couch then, she muttered. Get in bed, Liora. Kavi's voice was firm. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command that left no room for a rebuttal. Liora stood frozen for a second, her grip tightening on her laptop. Finally, she turned around. She walked to the far side of the bed and perched on the very edge of the mattress, staring at the blank wall. Kavi watched her in the dim light. I've never taken a woman who didn't want to be taken, Liora. She didn't move. You can rest assured I won't touch you, he added after a pause. Not unless you want me to. Liora stared straight ahead, choosing to ignore the last part of his sentence. She did believe him, though. They had lived together for 3 years under a contract that technically required her to satisfy him, yet he had never once made a move. He had stayed on his side of the line. She let out a long breath and finally crawled under the covers, pulling them up to her chin. The silence in the room grew heavy. Liora lay perfectly still, her heart drumming a fast, rhythmic beat against her ribs. She knew Kavi was awake, his breathing was too shallow and jagged for sleep. The quiet became a weight she couldn't carry anymore. What is your real reason? She asked. Kavi shifted, the mattress shifting with him. My real reason for what? Marrying you? No, Liora said, shaking her head against the pillow. Your real reason for shooting Alpha Malik. The room went silent again. Liora wondered if he would even answer. Then, a low scoff came from the darkness behind her. I am guilty of many things, Kavi said quietly. Worse things than you have seen. Probably worse than you can even imagine. But I do not lie, Liora. That was it. No more explanations followed. Liora thought about those words until her eyelids grew heavy. Eventually, she slipped into a restless, light sleep. When she woke the next morning, the space beside her was cold. Liora sat up and rubbed her eyes, looking around the empty room. Kavi was already gone. He hadn't even bothered to wake her up. Typical, she grumbled. She tossed the covers aside and headed for the shower. By the time she finished and changed into some casual loungewear, she felt a little more human. She grabbed her laptop and settled onto the bed. She needed to check in on Joel and grade some papers before her meeting with the girls at noon. Just as she was about to call Mora, the door swung open. Kavi walked in, looking sharp in a sleek black suit. He was holding his phone out, a genuine grin on his face. So, are you saying Daddy looks smart this morning? Kavi asked the phone. Joel's high-pitched, giggling voice filled the room. No. No. Kavi laughed, walking over to the bed. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard. Liora couldn't help but smile. Kavi handed her the phone, and her heart melted the moment she saw her son's face on the screen. Joel was in his pajamas, sitting in his high chair with bright smears of watercolor paint on his cheeks. Mommy! Joel shouted, waving his arms so hard he almost took the phone out of the nanny's hand. Hi, baby, Liora said, waving back. You look like you're having a very busy morning. Joel nodded eagerly. The old man fun. Is he now? Liora teased. Are you being a good boy? Do you miss me? Joel shook his head quickly, making Liora gasp in mock shock. My heart can't take it. Joel giggled, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Miss Mommy, he finally confessed. His little bottom lip gave a tiny tremble, and Liora felt a sharp pang of longing in her chest. Just one more night, baby, she promised. Can you stay strong for me? Joel nodded. In the background, Liora heard grandfather Elon calling for the boy. Go on, honey. I'll call you later, Liora said. The call ended, and she handed the phone back to Kavi. When did you call him? After my shower, Kavi said, slipping the phone into his pocket. About half an hour ago. Joel had a lot of gossip to share about the old man. Leora's lips twitched. Did you have my son spy on your grandfather? Kavi shrugged, looking innocent. I didn't ask him to spy, Liora. I just told him to let me know if my name came up in conversation. That is exactly what spying is, Kavi, she pointed out. Is it? He smirked. I didn't realize. Liora shook her head, unable to stay annoyed. Don't you have a meeting? Kavi checked his watch and nodded. I should go. He lingered for a second, a strange, unreadable look passing through his eyes. Then, he turned and walked out. As the door clicked shut, Liora sat there in the quiet. She realized with a start that they had just acted like a normal, functional couple. Something about this lake house was changing the way Kavi acted, and she wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. She looked at the closed door and whispered, Who are you today, Kavi? The car pulled up to the lake house exactly at noon. Liora watched the tires crunch over the gravel from her bedroom window. She had spent the morning grading papers, a quiet shield against the tension downstairs. She knew Ziva was somewhere in the house, likely preening, but Liora wasn't ready to play the role of the polite sister-in-law just yet. A light knock at the door signaled the end of her piece. Shira stepped inside with a small smile. We are heading out soon, Shira said. The car is ready. Liora grabbed her purse and followed her down to the porch. The sun was high and hot. Shira checked her watch, her brow furrowing as she looked toward the front door. Ziva seems to be running late, Shira noted. Do you mind waiting in the car while I go check on her? Liora nodded slowly. I don't mind at all. She walked to the car, grateful for the buffer. The driver opened the door, and Liora slid into the cool leather interior. She pulled out her headphones, clicking play on a playlist to drown out the world. She waited. 10 minutes turned into 20. 20 turned into 30. Finally, the house door opened. Ziva stepped out, looking like she was headed for a red carpet rather than a lunch. Her hair was swept up in an intricate, gravity-defying twist. Her lips were painted a bold, aggressive red. She greeted Shira with a bright, artificial laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Ziva stopped at the driveway, looking around with a confused pout. Where is my car? I thought it would be easier if we all traveled together, Shira explained, climbing into the passenger seat. Ziva's face darkened. She looked at the car like it was a rusted bucket, but she didn't argue. She pulled open the back door and stiffened when she saw Liora already sitting there. Perhaps we should take separate cars next time, Liora said, sliding her headphones down. That way, everyone can arrive at their own pace. Liora didn't blink as she stared at Ziva. The message was clear: you kept us waiting. Ziva didn't offer an apology. She just smoothed her dress, her jaw tight. You definitely owe Liora an apology, Ziva, Shira said, watching them through the rearview mirror. Ziva's eyes snapped to Liora's. For a split second, the mask slipped. Pure disdain flared in her gaze before she forced a sweet, innocent pout. I had a wardrobe emergency, Ziva said. Her voice was light, but the words were hollow. I'm sure you don't mind, Liora. Liora didn't bother responding. She just looked back out the window as the car began to move. The hour-long drive was mostly silent. Shira tried to break the ice by pointing out different pack territories along the road, talking about how the city had changed over the years. Ziva jumped on the conversation, her voice dripping with practiced warmth as she played the part of the perfect, interested Luna. Liora remained a ghost in the back seat. She gave a polite nod when Shira looked back, but she stayed quiet. Eventually, the car turned into a long driveway lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and marble statues. At the end stood a massive Victorian estate. I hope you both don't mind, Shira said as the car stopped. A few other Lunas will be joining us. It is just a tasting event, but these women are important. Make a good impression. Liora stepped out of the car, feeling a strange sense of detachment. In her old life, making a good impression was everything. Now, she felt like an observer. Ziva was the one with the title to protect. Staff members in crisp uniforms led them through a grand hall with gold chandeliers and polished floors. The air smelled of rich spices and roasted meat. When they entered the dining hall, a dozen women were already seated. They were dressed in understated, expensive silk, the kind of wealth that didn't need to scream. As they approached, one woman stood up and walked toward them with a wide smile. She bypassed Ziva and went straight to Liora, kissing her on the cheek. Luna Liora, the woman said warmly. It has been far too long. Ziva stiffened. Liora felt the heat radiating off her, but she didn't correct the woman. She simply offered a graceful smile. It is good to see you, Liora replied. The seating was quickly arranged. Because Liora was married to Kavi, the elder brother, the staff initially placed her ahead of Ziva in the hierarchy. Ziva looked like she might explode as she was forced to sit further down the table. Platters of steamed fish and bowls of creamy soup were brought out. Shira stood up to address the room. The Alpha Summit is almost here, Shira began. It is a time for alliances and business. Since my pack is hosting, I wanted us all to experience the menu. It is vital the food is perfect. The women clapped, and the tasting began. Liora ate quietly, offering short, polite feedback when asked. She watched the other Lunas. They were experts at smiling while keeping their real thoughts hidden. Liora knew the game well. She had played it for years with people she couldn't stand. The meal was going perfectly until Ziva cleared her throat. This soup is quite pleasant, Ziva said, raising her voice to catch the table's attention. She looked at Liora with a sharp glint in her eyes. Though I imagine Liora might want something heavier. Her husband was a rogue for so long. Old habits are hard to shake, aren't they? The table went quiet. A few women let out nervous chuckles. They looked at Liora, waiting for a reaction to the insult. Liora calmly set her spoon down. She didn't look angry, she looked bored. My husband wasn't a rogue, Liora said softly. She saw Ziva's smirk grow, thinking she'd caught Liora in a lie. Liora leaned back. He still is. The smirk on Ziva's face faltered. Being a rogue just means he doesn't have a pack, Liora continued. It isn't a secret. He is only attending this summit because the Elon family wants him to invest in their businesses. He has the money to spare, so here we are. A few Lunas giggled. Ziva's face turned a dusty shade of pink. The next course arrived, thin slices of lamb in a dark sauce. Ziva gripped her fork, her knuckles white. She wasn't finished. I just wonder how you are adjusting, Liora, Ziva said, her voice dripping with fake concern. It must be so uncomfortable. Going from Carmel to Kavi. 2 brothers in a row. Most women would find that difficult. The silence that followed was heavy. The Lunas exchanged looks of genuine discomfort. Ziva had broken the golden rule of these events: never air dirty laundry at the table. Liora didn't snap back. She didn't even look at Ziva. She let the silence stretch out, letting everyone see how desperate Ziva looked. After a long moment, Liora turned to the woman sitting on her left. "What do you think of this sauce?" Liora asked. The woman hesitated, then cleared her throat. "It is a bit too strong. It overpowers the meat." Liora smiled faintly and nodded. "I agree," Liora said, finally glancing toward Ziva. "Some things try too hard to stand out. They end up ruining the whole dish when they should have just been subtle." Ziva's eyes went wide, her mouth hovering open. "Don't you agree, Ziva? So, is Kavi just your ticket back into the Elon family?" Liora did not need to turn around to recognize that voice. It was low, sharp, and dripping with a bitterness Ziva usually hid behind a mask of innocence. Liora kept her eyes on the lobby below, watching the catering staff move like clockwork. The entire establishment was elegant, quiet, and far too expensive for a public scene, which was exactly why Ziva felt safe enough to strike. "You seem very concerned with my husband, Ziva," Liora replied. Her voice stayed smooth and cold. She didn't give Ziva the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "Husband?" Ziva let out a jagged laugh. She stepped up to the railing, her shoulder nearly brushing Liora's. "Is that what you call him? Everyone knows he's a murderer, Liora. Is your ego so bruised that you'll stoop that low just to keep the Elon name?" Liora finally turned her head. She met Ziva's gaze with a blank, unbothered stare. She remembered the girl who used to play the saint while slowly poisoning Carmel's mind. She remembered the girl who stood in the rain and smiled while Liora was kicked out of her own home. "Speaking of stooping low," Liora said, her voice a calm whisper that cut through the air. "Does Carmel know about you and Jaren?" The color drained from Ziva's face. Her eyes widened, her pupils shrinking into pinpricks of pure panic. For a second, the polished Luna looked like a cornered animal. "Did you run a background check on me?" Ziva hissed. She stepped closer, her hands trembling at her sides. "I didn't have to," Liora said. She leaned back against the banister, casual and relaxed. "People talk. Besides, having a shouting match with your ex-boyfriend in my backyard while you were busy sleeping with my husband wasn't exactly subtle." The silence between them snapped. Ziva's face twisted, the mask of the perfect wife shattering completely. "You bitch." Ziva's hand flew up. The slap echoed through the quiet hallway, a sharp crack that sent a stinging heat across Liora's cheek. Liora didn't cry out. She didn't even raise a hand to her face. She just watched Ziva's eyes. She saw the shift. She saw the moment Ziva realized they weren't alone in the building. Ziva's foot hooked behind her own heel. She began to lean back, her hands reaching out in the air as if she were being shoved. It was an old trick, the classic frame-up. Ziva was going to fall, scream, and tell the world that the crazy ex-wife tried to kill her. Liora moved faster. Instead of pulling away, Liora lunged forward. She grabbed Ziva's wrist with a grip like iron. With a sudden, violent twist of her torso, Liora swapped their positions. She used Ziva's own momentum against her, pulling the woman back to safety while flinging herself over the edge of the railing. Ziva's eyes went wide with genuine horror. This wasn't the plan. She stood frozen, her arms still outstretched as if she had just finished the push. Liora felt the floor vanish. Gravity took hold, pulling her down toward the marble lobby below. The air rushed past her ears, a cold whistle that drowned out the sudden screams from the women on the balcony. If Ziva planned to survive this fall, Liora thought as the ground rushed up to meet her, then so will I. She saw the flashes of cameras from the lobby, the press was already there. Perfect. Liora hit the floor with a sickening thud. The pain was a white-hot explosion that radiated from her side through her entire chest. Her vision blurred into dancing black spots, and her lungs seized, desperate for a breath that wouldn't come. Did she push her? Someone call an ambulance, a voice screamed from the stairs. Liora struggled to keep her eyes open for just one more second. She looked up, past the blur of concerned faces and flashing lights. High above, Ziva was looking down over the railing. The woman's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She looked guilty. She looked like a monster. Liora allowed a tiny, broken smile to touch her lips before the darkness took her. Ziva, why? Liora whispered, loud enough for the nearest witness to hear. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the first thing Liora heard. It was loud, rhythmic, and incredibly annoying. She tried to lift her hand to swat at the noise, but her arm felt like it was made of lead. A dull ache throbbed through her muscles, making every small movement feel like a marathon. Liora winced as she forced her eyes open. The hospital lights were harsh and unforgiving, stinging her vision until she had to squint. Her head spun. For a moment, the room tilted, and the overwhelming scent of industrial disinfectant filled her nose. She blinked several times, waiting for the world to stop rotating. She was in a hospital. The 4 lines snaking into her vein and the white sheets confirmed it. But as her senses returned, she felt something else. A warm hand was wrapped around hers. A thumb moved in a slow, soothing circle against her palm. The scent of familiar cologne drifted over her, steadying her racing heart. Liora turned her head slowly. Carmel sat in the chair beside her bed, his shoulders slumped and his head hanging low. Carmel, she whispered. Her voice sounded like she had swallowed sandpaper. Carmel's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, swirling with a mix of relief and intense worry. He leaned forward instantly, though he was careful not to disturb the wires connected to her arm. You're awake, he said, his voice thick. How do you feel? Liora, do you know who I am? Liora frowned at him. She wanted to roll her eyes, but even that felt like too much effort. Of course she knew him. The fog in her mind began to lift, and the memories of the afternoon hit her all at once. The food tasting. Ziva's sneer. The sharp sting of a palm against her cheek. Then, the terrifying sensation of empty air as she tumbled backward. She touched her face gingerly. The skin near her jaw still burned where Ziva had struck her. Anger flickered in her chest, hot and sharp. She remembered the cameras. She remembered the flashes of light just as she fell. Ziva had planned it all. She had set the stage to look like the victim once again, making Liora out to be the villain in front of the whole world. Should I call the doctor? Carmel asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Why are you here? Liora asked. Her throat felt tight and dry. Without a word, Carmel reached for a plastic cup on the bedside table. He held the straw to her lips, his hands steady. Liora hesitated, staring at him for a second before she leaned in to take a sip. The cold water was a mercy. I came as soon as I heard what happened, Carmel said. He set the cup down, but he didn't move away. His expression was shadowed with guilt. I'm sorry, Liora. This shouldn't have happened. I can't believe Ziva would actually lay a hand on you. Liora watched him closely. She waited for the but. I know she didn't mean for you to fall, he continued, his gaze dropping to their joined hands. But she should have never hit you. You don't deserve to be in a hospital bed. Liora felt a bitter laugh bubble in her throat, though she didn't let it out. There it was. He was already making excuses for her. Even with Liora hooked up to a monitor, Carmel couldn't help but defend the woman who had pushed her. You really believe her? Liora asked. You think it was just an accident? Carmel's jaw tightened. She was upset, Liora. Things got out of hand. But that doesn't mean I'm okay with you being hurt. Liora pulled her hand away from his. The loss of warmth was immediate, but she needed the distance. She thought about Joel. If her son saw her like this, he would be terrified. He hated hospitals. The thought of his little face crumpled in tears hurt more than the bruise on her cheek. "Why are you acting like you care now?" Liora asked. Her voice was colder now, more focused. "Because I do care," he insisted. "Whatever happened between us in the past, seeing you like this, it isn't right." Liora turned her gaze to the ceiling. The past. He spoke about it like it was a minor disagreement, not a series of events that had destroyed her life. She remembered the nights she had spent alone, wondering why she wasn't enough. She remembered the way he had looked at her with disgust when Ziva accused her of things she hadn't done. "Kalila almost died because of me," Liora said, her voice dripping with irony. "That's what you told everyone, right? So why am I suddenly the one who doesn't deserve to suffer?" Carmel flinched. He looked like she had slapped him. "That's in the past, Liora. I don't want to talk about that right now." "You don't want to talk about it because you weren't the one who lost everything," she snapped. The adrenaline was finally starting to override the pain. "Your name wasn't dragged through the dirt. Your face wasn't on the front page of every tabloid as a monster. You just moved on. You had Ziva. You had your life. I had nothing." "Liora, please," he groaned, reaching out again. "I just don't want us to fight while you're in this condition." Liora pulled further away, her back pressing against the hospital mattress. "And you still think I did it? Deep down, you still believe I tried to hurt Kalila all those years ago?" Carmel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence in the room grew heavy, suffocating any hope Liora had left for a sincere apology. He was blinded by the mate bond, or perhaps he was just blinded by Ziva. Either way, the truth didn't matter to him. "You're still choosing her," Liora whispered. "Even now." "It's complicated," Carmel said. "It's not complicated at all," Liora replied. She looked him dead in the eye, her expression hardening into a mask of indifference. "There is no us, Carmel. There never was." Carmel stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. "I'm trying to make things right, Liora. Can't you see that? You can't fix a bridge you burned down 3 years ago just by sitting in a hospital chair for an hour," she said. "I want you to leave. I want to see my son." Carmel looked like he wanted to argue, but the coldness in her eyes stopped him. He took a step back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I'll check on the discharge papers," he said quietly. "But I'm not going far." "Don't do me any favors," Liora retorted. As he walked toward the door, Liora felt the weight of the last 3 years pressing down on her. She wasn't the weak girl he had cast aside anymore. She had survived being banished, and she would survive this. Carmel paused at the doorway, his hand on the handle. He turned back, his expression unreadable. "Ziva is going to apologize, Liora. I'll make sure of it." Liora narrowed her eyes, a sharp retort on the tip of her tongue. "Do you honestly think her words mean anything to me?" "I think we need to finish this talk," Carmel said. He looked like he had a dozen more words ready to spill. His face was tight with a frustration he didn't try to hide. But the heavy door clicked open before he could continue. A doctor walked in, holding a digital tablet and looking focused. Liora felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't ready to hear Carmel's excuses. It was clear where he stood. He had chosen a side 3 years ago, and he was still standing on it. Even though she had taken the fall for Ziva back then, Ziva had walked away clean while Liora lay in a hospital bed. Now, Carmel was here trying to offer an apology that Ziva didn't have the guts to give herself. It was the same old story. Ziva knew how to pull the strings, and Carmel was happy to be the puppet. The soft, nostalgic feeling Liora felt earlier died a quick death. He hadn't changed at all. "Good evening, Liora," the doctor said. He stepped closer and checked the monitors. "How are you feeling right now?" Liora took a second to actually check in with her body. She stopped looking at Carmel and focused on the dull ache in her limbs. Her right arm was heavy, trapped in a thick white cast. There was a sharp, pulsing knot on the back of her head that throbbed with every heartbeat. "I feel like I fell off a building," Liora said. The doctor let out a short, dry chuckle. "Well, you did. That is a very accurate description." He tapped a few notes into his tablet. "Any specific pain? Any blurry vision or nausea?" "Don't make jokes about this, Aura," Carmel snapped. He was scowling now, his arms crossed over his chest. Liora didn't even give him a verbal reply. She just shot him a look so cold it should have frozen him in place. He didn't have the right to tell her how to handle her own pain. She turned her head back to the doctor, ignoring the way the movement made her brain rattle. "I just want to sleep," she said softly. "I'm exhausted." The doctor nodded. He turned his attention to Carmel. "And you are? Mr. Elon, right?" Carmel straightened his posture. "Yes. That's me." "You must be her guardian then," the doctor said, making an assumption. "The husband?" "I am," Carmel said. The words came out of him like a reflex. He realized the mistake a second later and opened his mouth to fix it. "No, I mean." "No," Liora cut in. Her voice was flat and hard. "He isn't." The doctor looked back and forth between them. The silence in the room became thick and uncomfortable. Then, the door opened again. Kavi stepped into the room. Liora felt the tension in her chest snap. She let out a long breath she didn't know she was holding. Seeing him felt like finally finding a solid piece of ground in the middle of a swamp. Kavi didn't rush. He walked in with slow, heavy strides. He looked like he owned the floor, the building, and everything in it. He kept his hands buried deep in his pockets. To anyone else, he looked perfectly calm. But Liora saw the way his jaw was set. She saw the slight tension in his shoulders. He was fuming. She wondered if he was mad at her. Was he angry because he found her alone with Carmel again? Or was it just the fact that she was broken and lying in a hospital bed? With Kavi, it was hard to tell. He walked straight to the side of the bed opposite Carmel. He leaned down and pressed a firm, lingering kiss against her forehead. His skin felt cool against her feverish head. The doctor looked at Kavi for a lead. "And you are?" "That would be me," Kavi said. He didn't look at the doctor. He kept his eyes locked on Liora. "He is my husband," Liora confirmed. The doctor relaxed a little. "I see. Well, Mr. Elon already handled the paperwork for the discharge. We were just finishing up the final check." Liora felt a pang of confusion. If Kavi had already done the paperwork, he must have been here for a while. Why was she alone with Carmel when she woke up? Had he been standing in the hallway watching them? The thought made her skin crawl. Kavi was never simple. He always had a reason for the things he did. The fall was bad, but it could have been worse, the doctor explained. "You have a fractured arm, a sprained ankle, and a minor concussion. No internal bleeding." He looked at his notes again. "Your alpha bloodline is doing most of the work for us. Your healing rate is much higher than a normal person's." "That's good to hear," Liora said, forcing a small smile. "We gave you some stimulants to kickstart the process," the doctor added. "You'll heal fast over the next 24 hours. You should be back to normal in 2 days. I'll send a nurse in to help you get ready to leave." The doctor nodded to Kavi and left the room. Carmel stood there for a long moment. He looked back and forth between Liora and Kavi. His eyes were dark with a mix of jealousy and regret. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but Kavi's presence was like a wall he couldn't climb. "I'll see you back at the house," Carmel said. His voice was tight. He turned on his heel and walked out without looking back. The door shut. The room went silent. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy and dark. Kavi didn't move from his spot by the wall. He just stared at her with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. "I didn't bring any flowers," Kavi said suddenly. I didn't buy a card either. Liora blinked. That's okay. I don't really care about flowers. I made a phone call instead, Kavi said. He pushed off the wall and took a step toward the bed. I did some research while you were asleep. Ziva has quite a few properties to her name. She has a lot of money. And, of course, she has her life. Liora felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Kavi? What are you talking about? By tomorrow morning, she will only have one of those things left, Kavi said. He wasn't smiling. There wasn't a hint of a joke in his voice. His eyes were like chips of ice. I'm going to let you choose which one she keeps. Leora's heart hammered against her ribs. You're kidding. You can't be serious. Kavi leaned over her. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked dangerous. I don't joke about people who hurt what belongs to me, Kavi whispered. I already told her which one I want to take. Kavi, stop it, Liora pleaded. Pick one, Liora. Her money or her life? You did what? Liora whispered. Her head whipped around so fast she expected her neck to snap. She stared at Kavi with her mouth hanging open. She had to be hearing things. There was no way he just admitted to that. Liora didn't like Ziva either. Nobody did. But she had never once thought about murder. The idea was completely insane. It was out of line. Then again, Kavi lived his entire life out of line. He looked completely bored as he leaned against the wall. Something I should have done a long time ago, Kavi said. He sounded like he was talking about the weather. He wasn't talking about rain or sun, though. He was talking about killing his own brother's wife. Liora gripped the thin hospital sheets with her good hand. The fall from the stairs hadn't even been that high, but Kavi was acting like she had been pushed off a mountain. He was fuming under that calm mask. Kavi, call it off, Liora said. Her voice was slow and firm. Right now. No. Kavi crossed his arms over his broad chest. I don't like her. I can't stand her. I refuse to let her be a problem anymore. Liora felt a surge of heat in her chest. What is wrong with you? I'm the one who fell, not you. Why can't you understand that? I understand plenty, he snapped. She's Carmel's wife. Liora hissed. She glanced at the hospital door, praying no one was listening. You can't just decide to get rid of someone because they annoy you. That is total garbage, Kavi. Kavi just shrugged. I can. Liora opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Kavi was the most stubborn man she had ever met. He didn't listen to anyone. She wanted to believe he was joking, but Kavi didn't do jokes. Back in Ramat, he had handled plenty of people who got in his way. He would say one word, and a few days later, those people were on the news. They went missing or turned up dead. He always did it cleanly. No one ever found a trail back to him. His ties to the underworld gave him all the tools he needed. He didn't mind getting his hands dirty. He seemed to love it. Hurting Ziva makes you an enemy of the entire Elan pack, Liora said, trying a different path. She's the Luna. Your grandfather will hunt you down. Carmel will too. You just got your banishment lifted. Do you really want to lose everything again? She was desperate. Reasoning with Kavi was a losing game. She had to make him see the logic, or maybe, she had to make him see her. Is it worth it? She asked softly. Kavi frowned. His eyes narrowed until they were sharp slits of ice. What is that supposed to mean? Liora took a breath. If you get kicked out again because of me, Kavi, would it be worth it for a temporary contract? Kavi didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at her. His eyes flashed with pure annoyance. He shook his head slowly. If you weren't in a hospital bed, Liora, I would show you exactly how stupid that question is, he growled. The way he said it felt like a promise. Leora's heart dropped. Her pulse started to race against her will. It wasn't fear. It was that strange, heavy heat that only Kavi could create. He was a dangerous man. She knew that. She had seen it. Yet, he stirred a primal urge inside her that she didn't want to admit was there. Worth it? Kavi asked. He stepped toward the bed. From the moment you signed that paper, Liora, you and Joel became mine to protect. He stopped right at the edge of the bed. He looked down at her with eyes that promised trouble. Mine, he said, drawing out the word. Liora didn't know if she understood what that meant yet. She didn't know what it felt like to belong to a man like him. Kavi leaned down suddenly. He placed a hand on each side of her pillow. He caged her in. The scent of him hit her like a wave. It was tobacco, expensive cologne, and something purely him. Liora was stuck in a cast. She couldn't move even if she wanted to. He was acting like a predator, and she was the prey. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Kavi let out a low grunt. His breath brushed against her skin. It was light, but it made her shiver. I'm not a good man, Liora. I know it. You know it. The whole world knows it. Liora exhaled sharply. Her breath was shaky. What are you trying to say? Kavi made a low, animal sound in his throat. It was a frustrated growl. Listen to me. Everything I want from you, none of it is kind. None of it is proper. And none of it is slow. His voice dropped to a raspy whisper. He swallowed hard. Liora couldn't stop her eyes from following the movement of his throat. You're in a hospital bed, Kavi muttered. Your hair is a mess and your arm is in a cast. You look like a wreck. And still, all I can think about is how I want to break every rule to have you. He leaned closer until their noses almost touched. This wasn't the deal, he said. I didn't ask for you to get inside my head. But you did. And now you have to deal with the consequences. His breathing was heavy now. Liora could feel the heat radiating off him. I won't let anyone else touch you, Kavi promised. You're mine to look after. Only mine. Leora's lips parted. Her heart was thudding so hard it hurt her ribs. Kavi didn't wait any longer. He leaned in the rest of the way and claimed her lips with his own. Don't ever ask me if you're worth it again, Kavi whispered against her mouth. The rain pelted the roof of the car in a steady, rhythmic beat. Outside, the world was a gray blur of wet pavement and dim streetlights. Inside, the air was thick enough to choke on. Liora kept her eyes fixed on the window. She could still feel the phantom heat of Kavi's lips against hers. It wasn't just a tingle. It was a burn that refused to fade. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the way he looked at her back at the hospital. He didn't look at her like a prize to be won. He looked at her like she was already his property. She hated it. She hated his arrogance and the way he breathed down her neck. But as she watched his hands grip the steering wheel, her own body betrayed her. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. Kavi's knuckles were white. He didn't look at her, but he didn't have to. The tension radiating off him was a physical force. On his bottom lip, a faint smear of her pink lip gloss remained. He hadn't wiped it off. He wore it like a mark of victory. Suddenly, the tires screeched. Liora gasped as the car jerked sharply to the right. The vehicle skidded across the wet asphalt before slamming into a park. The engine died, leaving only the sound of the rain. What is wrong with you? Liora snapped, her voice trembling. Kavi. You could have killed us. Kavi didn't move. He leaned back into the leather seat, staring straight through the windshield. His chest rose and fell in heavy, jagged motions. He looked like a man trying to keep a monster on a short leash. Why didn't you tell him? Kavi's voice was a low, dangerous growl. Liora blinked, her anger momentarily replaced by confusion. Tell who? What are you talking about? Kavi turned his head. His eyes were cold, piercing through the dim light of the cabin. Don't play stupid, Liora. Carmel. Why didn't you tell him the truth? Liora felt the air leave her lungs. She looked away, focusing on a single raindrop racing down the glass. He said. I don't care what he said. Kavi slammed his hand against the wheel. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small space. I don't give a damn about his feelings. I want to know why you stayed quiet. Why hide the fact that his precious wife is the reason you fell? Liora bit her lip. She had the words ready in the hospital. She could have stripped Ziva of her mask right then and there. She could have told Carmel that his true mate was a woman who poisoned her own daughter just to frame a rival. But she hadn't. It's not that simple, Liora whispered. It's perfectly simple, Kavi countered. You're protecting him. You couldn't bear to see his heart break. You didn't want him to know his life is a lie. He loves her, Kavi. And Kalila. Kalila is a child. If I destroy Ziva, I destroy that little girl's world. Kavi let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It was a bitter sound that made Liora's skin crawl. You're so noble, aren't you? Or are you just terrified? Liora turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. Terrified of what? Terrified that he already knows, Kavi said, leaning closer. The scent of rain and expensive cologne filled her senses. Terrified that Carmel knows Ziva is a snake and he chose her anyway. Did you ever think about that? He didn't pick her for love, Liora. He picked her for legitimacy. Liora felt a cold chill run down her spine. The Elon family was obsessed with the legend of the true mate bond. It was the ultimate mark of a leader. He needed that bond to become alpha over me, Kavi sneered. He traded you for a title. And now you're sitting here, playing the martyr for a man who used you as a stepping stone. Stop it, Liora said, her voice rising. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what's happening. You took my hand because you wanted to be the villain. You wanted to make him hurt. But now that you see he still wants you, you're getting soft. Kavi's hand reached out, his fingers grazing her jaw. You can try to save him from me, Liora. You can even try to save him from her. But you can't save a man from his own choices. Liora's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. She felt trapped between the man she used to love and the man who was currently dismantling her soul. I've had enough of this, Liora said, reaching for the door handle. I've had enough of you. Kavi's movement was a blur. Before she could click the lock, his hand was behind her neck, pinning her against the headrest. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot against her skin. The hell you have, Kavi growled. He didn't wait for an answer. He leaned in, his lips crashing against hers with a raw, desperate hunger that silenced the rest of the world. Drive the car, Kavi, or let me out. Stop the car, Liora said, her voice shaking. Kavi didn't listen. Instead, he lunged across the center console. His mouth crashed against hers before she could pull away. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was rough and punishing. He moved like he wanted to erase every word she had just spoken. Liora struggled. She kept her casted arm tucked close to her body, but she used her good hand to push against his chest. It was like trying to move a brick wall. Kavi didn't budge an inch. His lips moved with a desperate urgency. When his tongue brushed her bottom lip, it wasn't a request. It was a demand. Liora knew she should fight harder. She should scream or kick. But her body wasn't following orders. Her lips parted on their own. Kavi let out a low, rough sound deep in his throat. It sounded like victory. He tasted like cool mint and something sweet, mixed with the heat of his anger. Liora felt a spark of fire spread through her veins. He was caging her in, pressing her against the seat until she couldn't think straight. Her mind was a blur of confusion and a rising heat she couldn't ignore. Kavi gripped the back of her neck. He wasn't hurting her, but his hold was firm. He was making sure she stayed right where he wanted her. Liora told herself she hated him. She told herself he was arrogant and cruel. Yet, as the kiss deepened, she found herself leaning into him. She felt like a person who had been wandering in the desert and finally found water. She fisted her hand into his coat. She didn't know if she was trying to push him away or pull him closer. The growl in his throat suggested he didn't care which one it was. Kavi used one hand to brace himself against the seat while the other tangled in her hair. He tilted her head back, deepening the kiss until Liora had to gasp for air. He caught the sound in his own mouth. He took it as if it belonged to him. As if she belonged to him. Not enough, Kavi muttered against her lips. It's not enough. He reached out and pulled her across the center console. Liora found herself straddling his lap. The steering wheel pressed hard into her back, but she barely felt it. His chest was slammed against hers. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, matching the wild rhythm of her own. The air in the car grew thick and heavy. Kavi moved like he was staking a claim. Every movement of his mouth told her the same thing. He wanted her to know she was his, not anyone else's. Liora was drowning. She needed air, but Kavi wouldn't let go. In a moment of sheer desperation, she bit down on his lip. She tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood. Kavi didn't pull back. He growled, the vibration shaking Liora to her core. He only kissed her harder. He seemed ready to devour her completely before he ever let her walk away. When he finally pulled back, they were both gasping for breath. Leora's chest heaved. Her lips felt swollen and wet. A small smear of blood stayed on her chin. Kavi stared at her with dark, piercing eyes. He didn't look sorry. He didn't look like he regretted a single second of it. He reached up and used his tongue to wipe the blood from his own lip. He did it slowly, watching her the whole time. He wanted her to see it. He wanted her to feel the madness that was spiraling between them. Leora's throat felt tight. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. She looked at him, her skin flushed and burning. She tried to find her anger, but it was buried under a heavy layer of desire. "Kavi, you hate me," Liora whispered. Her voice trembled. "You don't get to kiss me like you own me." It was a weak warning, and she knew it. Kavi's jaw tightened. He reached out, his thumb brushing the sensitive skin of her throat. He looked at her lips, then back at her eyes. "That's where you're wrong," Kavi said. His voice was low and dangerous. "I don't hate you, Liora. I hate that he had you first." The words felt like a physical blow. Leora's stomach twisted. A mix of anger and shock flooded her chest. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to remind him of the legal papers they had both signed. She wanted to tell him he was acting like a monster. But she just sat there, breathless. Kavi didn't lie. He was many things, but he was always honest about his darkness. Kavi leaned in again. His mouth grazed the shell of her ear. His hot breath sent a shiver down her spine. "And do you want to know the worst part?" he whispered. His lips brushed her skin, leaving a trail of fire behind. "You want me just as much as I want you. You hate yourself for it, but you do." Liora found her strength and shoved at his chest. "You're delusional." Her voice cracked at the end. It was the sound of a lie. Kavi smirked. He didn't look offended. He looked like a man who had already won. He finally let her go. Liora scrambled back into the passenger seat, fixing her clothes with trembling hands. Kavi turned back to the steering wheel. He gripped it so hard his knuckles turned white. He started the engine, and the car roared to life. A heavy silence filled the small space. Liora stared out the window, her heart still racing. Her lips were sore, and her mind was a mess. She hated that he was right. "Don't ever do that again," Liora snapped. "Put me down before I make a scene, Kavi," Liora hissed, her voice low enough to stay between them but sharp enough to cut. Kavi didn't even glance at her. He pulled her closer against his chest, his boots crunching rhythmically on the gravel as he marched toward the lake house. He handled her like she was made of glass, careful to avoid the weight on her injured arm, yet his grip was an iron vice. It was infuriating. Only 20 minutes ago, he had been a cold stranger in the car, silencing her with a kiss that felt more like a claim than an apology. Now, he was back to playing the protective husband. "I have legs," Liora insisted, pushing against his suit jacket. "I can walk fine." "You're staying where you are," Kavi replied. His voice was flat, devoid of the heat from their earlier argument, which somehow made it more intimidating. He didn't stop until they reached the porch. The heavy wooden door swung open, revealing Shira and Melek. Their faces were etched with a mix of pity and panic. Standing just behind them, looking like a wilted lily, was Ziva. Liora felt a familiar coldness settle in her stomach. She forced her muscles to relax, plastering a tired, sweet smile on her face. She knew this game. If she looked angry, she looked guilty. "Liora." "Oh, thank goodness," Shira cried out, rushing toward them. Her eyes scanned Leora's bandaged arm, shimmering with genuine tears. "I am so sorry. I should have never suggested that tasting. I feel like this is all my fault." Liora opened her mouth to comfort her, but a shadow moved behind Shira. Ziva stepped forward, her bottom lip trembling in a way that had clearly been practiced in a mirror. "Oh, Liora, I've been so worried," Ziva whimpered, reaching out a hand she knew better than to actually touch Liora with. "Are you all right?" "I feel just terrible." "Does she look all right to you?" Kavi's voice sliced through the air like a razor. The porch went silent. Ziva's hand froze midair. Her expression faltered for a split second, a flash of pure resentment darting through her eyes before she retreated back into her role as the victim. She sniffled, dabbing at her dry eyes. I know Kavi is angry," Ziva whispered, looking toward Melek and Shira for support. But when Liora started bringing up Kalila, "I just lost my head. I didn't mean for her to fall. I just wanted her to stop talking about my daughter." Liora felt the air leave her lungs. She stared at Ziva in disbelief. Kalila? She hadn't mentioned the child once during their confrontation. Ziva was playing her favorite card, the sick child defense. It was the same tactic she had used for years to keep Carmel tethered to her side and to turn the entire pack against Liora. Liora looked at Melek and Shira. The change was subtle, but it was there. The warmth in Shira's eyes cooled into a guarded wariness. Melek shifted his weight, his gaze drifting away from Liora. To them, Liora was the woman who had once been accused of poisoning that very child. Mentioning Kalila was a low blow, and Ziva knew exactly how to make Liora look like the villain again. She's winning, Liora thought, a hollow ache forming in her chest. No matter what I do, they will always believe her version of the truth. Ziva glanced at Liora, a tiny, triumphant smirk ghosting her lips where the others couldn't see it. It was a silent dare. Go ahead. Tell them I'm lying. See who they believe. Liora braced herself to speak, but Kavi's chest rumbled against her back. He hadn't set her down. If anything, his hold tightened until she could feel the thrum of his heartbeat. Listen to me, you little liar, Kavi snapped. The insult hit like a physical blow. Shira gasped, and Melek stepped forward, his brow furrowing. Ziva's jaw dropped, her theatrical tears drying instantly in the face of Kavi's raw aggression. I don't care what story you've cooked up, Kavi continued, his voice dropping to a deathly, quiet hiss. Get out of my sight right now, or you'll find yourself with 3 times as many broken bones as my wife has. Kavi. Melek barked, stepping toward them. That is enough. Calm yourself. Kavi didn't even turn his head. He shrugged Melek's hand off his shoulder with a violent jerk of his frame. Don't tell me what to do, Melek. Not when it comes to her. He stepped closer to Ziva, looming over her. The power rolling off him was suffocating. Ziva scrambled back, her heels clicking frantically on the floorboards until she hit the house siding. She was trembling for real now, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. You should be grateful I'm letting you breathe, Kavi said, his words hanging in the air like a terminal sentence. But if you ever lay a hand on Liora again, I will make sure it is the last thing you ever do. Don't think for a second that your title or your husband can protect you from me. I will end you. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the wind through the trees seemed to stop. Kavi didn't wait for a rebuttal. He turned on his heel, carrying Liora toward the front door. As they reached the threshold, the door pulled back. Carmel was standing there, his face a mask of conflicted agony. He looked at Liora, his lips parting as if he wanted to beg for her forgiveness or explain away Ziva's lies. Kavi stopped for only a second. He didn't say a word, but the scoff that escaped him was louder than any shout. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. Carmel's eyes flickered to Liora, then to his brother, and finally, he stepped aside, lowering his head. He didn't defend his wife. He didn't challenge Kavi. He simply let them pass. I thought as much, Kavi muttered under his breath. He carried Liora into the house, leaving the ruins of the family gathering behind them. Liora looked over Kavi's shoulder one last time, seeing Ziva clutching her own arms in fear and Carmel standing alone in the doorway. For the first time in her life, the villain wasn't her. Don't ever look back at them, Kavi whispered, his voice finally softening as he headed for the stairs. They aren't worth the breath. Kavi slammed the bedroom door. The heavy wood echoed through the suite with a sharp crack. He didn't say a word, but the tension coming off him was thick enough to choke on. He still held Liora tightly in his arms. He didn't seem to realize he hadn't put her down yet. Liora kept her head tucked low. She focused on the fabric of his shirt rather than looking him in the eye. Kavi was an alpha, and when he was this angry, his presence felt like a physical weight. It made her want to curl into a ball and hide. She didn't understand why he was so worked up. He had survived Carmel's insults earlier, but something about the last few minutes had pushed him over the edge. Kavi? Liora whispered. She reached out and gave his shirt a small tug. You can put me down now. Kavi stopped walking. He looked down at her. For a second, Liora forgot what she was going to say. His eyes were dark and swirling with a temper that made her breath hitch. She instinctively tried to look away, but a low growl rumbled in his chest. Look at me, Liora, Kavi said. His voice was like gravel. Always look at me. Liora forced herself to meet his stare. Every instinct told her to run, but she stayed still. Kavi searched her face as if he were looking for a secret hidden in her expression. He looked at her with an intensity that felt like a lock and key. She felt like he was trying to read her mind, searching for a loyalty she wasn't sure she had yet. After a long silence, Kavi finally blinked. You were saying? The bed, Liora said softly. Please. Kavi didn't break eye contact as he walked to the edge of the mattress. He lowered her onto the silk sheets with surprising gentleness. He stayed standing right over her. Liora looked down at her shoes, feeling the awkwardness grow between them. Kavi exhaled a long, slow breath. He reached down toward her feet. Liora flinched and pulled her legs back. I can do it myself, she insisted. Kavi froze. He shot her a look that was pure steel. Stay. Liora felt a spark of her own temper light up. Stay. What is that supposed to mean? Am I a dog to you? Kavi didn't answer. He didn't even acknowledge the bite in her voice. He reached out, grabbed her ankles, and pulled her feet back toward him. He knelt on the floor and began to unstrap her high heels. His movements were slow and methodical. I told you, I've got it, Liora tried again. Not now, Liora, Kavi warned. His voice dropped an octave. It was deeper and much huskier than before. I am on edge. Your stubbornness is making things worse. You know what that does to me. Liora went still. She knew that tone. If you keep pushing me, Kavi muttered, I won't be able to hold my wolf back. Liora bit her lip and stayed quiet. Kavi had a much stronger connection to his wolf than most people she knew. It made him faster and stronger, but it also made him dangerous. He lived on a razor's edge. If he lost control, there was no telling what would happen. Kavi finished removing her shoes. He set them aside and then helped her lean back, pulling the heavy duvet over her legs. He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned over her to inspect the cast on her leg. He frowned as he checked the material, his eyes flashing with a brief spark of anger every time he saw the injury. Liora watched him. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had been so cold at the party. One minute he was a possessive alpha who took whatever he wanted, and the next, he was acting like her protector. She wondered if he even knew which version of himself was real. Kavi stood up and walked to the nightstand. He began stripping off his wristwatch and his heavy knuckle rings. The metal clinked against the wood. "Say what is on your mind," Kavi said. He didn't even look back at her. Liora hesitated. "You shouldn't have snapped at Melek. Your grandfather won't be happy about that. Don't you want to make a good impression?" Kavi let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He started unbuttoning his shirt. "I don't care about impressing that old man." "Then why are we even here?" Liora asked. "I thought the whole point of coming back was because you wanted Elon Corporation." Kavi shrugged. He tossed his shirt onto the nearby couch. "I don't want the company, Liora," Kavi said. He turned around to face her. His chest was bare, and his muscles were tight with lingering tension. "It is mine." "There is a difference." Liora raised an eyebrow. "Most people think the title goes to whoever is the best fit." "It's a business, Kavi. It isn't just about who was born first." Kavi stepped toward the bed. He moved with the slow, calculated grace of a predator. He reached for his belt and unfastened it. He kept his eyes locked on hers, refusing to let her look away. "Do you really think the only thing I have going for me is my age?" Kavi asked. He took another step closer. Liora felt her heart hammer against her ribs. He looked like he was ready to prove exactly why he was the one in charge. "Tell me, Liora," Kavi whispered, leaning down. "Do you really think Melek is a better man than me?" "You should really pay more attention to the man in front of you, Liora," Kavi said. He stood at the foot of the bed, his movements slow and deliberate. He kicked his pants aside and stood there in only his dark boxer briefs. Liora felt her throat go dry. She forced herself to look away from the sharp lines of his physique, focusing instead on the heavy silence of the lake house. "I've been your legal advisor for 3 years, Kavi," Liora murmured, trying to keep her voice steady. "I know Masel Incorporated has its hands in everything from nightclubs to the fight dens. I know what you're capable of." Kavi arched a dark brow, a faint, knowing smirk tugging at his lips. "You know the legal side of it." "The surface." "I know it goes deeper," she challenged, leaning back against the headboard. "I know there are things you keep in the dark. Guns, the underground, things I have no interest in seeing." She didn't want to be any more intertwined with him than she already was. Every time she learned a new secret, the knot between them tightened. "If you have all that power, you don't need the Elon Corporation," she added, her voice dropping an octave. "You don't need the pack, either." Kavi shrugged, his shoulder muscles rippling under the dim light. "I don't. But Carmel does. He values that title more than his own soul." Liora frowned. It wasn't about the money or the prestige for Kavi. It was about the hunt. He wanted to strip Carmel of everything, the company, the pack, and perhaps even the people around him. Before she could ask how far he planned to take his revenge, a muffled, jagged sob echoed through the hallway. The sound was distant but sharp. Shira wasn't the type to break down like that. The high-pitched, frantic weeping could only belong to one person. "That's Ziva," Liora whispered, her eyes darting toward the bedroom door. Kavi didn't even flinch. He walked over to the nightstand and poured himself a glass of vodka, his movements fluid and indifferent. Outside the room, heavy footsteps thudded against the floorboards, followed by a desperate plea. "Cam. Stop. It's not what you think." Please, come back. Ziva screamed. Liora looked at Kavi. He was sipping his drink, staring at the wall with a chillingly calm expression. The chaos outside didn't seem to touch him, if anything, it seemed to satisfy him. Kavi, Liora said, her voice laced with suspicion. What did you do? He offered another casual shrug, refusing to meet her eyes. He didn't deny it. He didn't have to. Kavi, talk to me, she pressed. When he remained silent, Liora lunged for her phone on the nightstand. She needed to know what was happening in the world outside this room. Put the phone down, Liora, Kavi grunted. I want your eyes on me. She ignored him, her thumbs swiping rapidly across the screen. A breaking news headline flashed in bold letters at the top of her feed: Midnight Inferno, Hazel Mall branches leveled. Liora's breath hitched as she read the report. A freak lightning storm had allegedly struck all 3 locations of the luxury VIP mall at exactly 9 p.m. But the weather wasn't the real story. The investigation had already uncovered that the malls, previously thought to be owned by a rival firm, were actually the secret property of Ziva Elon. The wife of the Alpha, Liora whispered, reading the text aloud. Hidden assets? Fraud allegations? She remembered what Kavi had said at the hospital. He had promised that Ziva would have nothing left by morning. She had assumed he was just venting, but Kavi never made empty threats. He had just burned down a woman's entire empire and made it look like an act of God. How could you do this? Liora hissed, looking up at him in horror. You destroyed everything. I was being merciful, Kavi replied, his voice cold. The news report continued to scroll, mentioning that the police were looking into why Ziva had concealed the ownership from the Elon Corporation. The scandal was already dismantling the family's reputation. Before Liora could finish the article, Kavi's hand shot out. He snatched the phone from her grip and tossed it onto the armchair across the room. He stepped into her personal space, his fingers gripping her chin to force her gaze upward. His pupils were dilated, dark with a predatory intensity that made her heart hammer against her ribs. He leaned in until his breath fanned across her lips. What did I say about being stubborn, Liora? Kavi asked. You're going to break that glass if you grip it any tighter, Kavi. Liora didn't look up from her phone, but her voice was sharp enough to cut through the tension in the bedroom. Kavi didn't answer. Instead, he took a long, slow swallow of the vodka, letting the liquid burn its way down his throat. He needed the burn. It was the only thing grounding him while his wolf paced restlessly behind his ribs, claws scraping against his self-control. He couldn't keep his eyes off her. It was a physical ache, a magnetic pull that felt less like a choice and more like a biological command. Since the moment he heard she was in danger, the protective instincts of an alpha had taken over, turning his blood into a low-boil slurry of aggression and need. He had brought her back to the estate to keep her safe, yet the danger had come from inside his own circle. The thought of Ziva Elon made Kavi's jaw tighten. He watched Liora wince as a video played on her screen, Ziva's high-pitched, fake sobs echoing through the quiet room. I told you to put that away, Kavi said, his voice dropping an octave into a low rumble. Stop watching that trash. It's the news, Kavi. It involves us, Liora replied, her eyes flashing with a mix of exhaustion and defiance. Kavi set the glass down on the nightstand with a heavy thud. He didn't care about the news. He didn't care about the scandals or the lies Ziva was weaving to keep Carmel trapped. To Kavi, Ziva was a pest, a woman built on a foundation of secrets that he could dismantle with a single phone call. He had stayed his hand only because Ziva was slowly ruining Carmel, and Kavi found a grim sort of justice in that. But the moment she touched Liora, the rules changed. She isn't worth your time, Kavi muttered, stepping closer to the bed. And she won't be a problem much longer. Liora finally looked at him, her gaze scanning his face before dropping lower. He saw the exact moment she noticed the tension in his body. Her breath hitched, a soft sound that sent a jolt of electricity straight to his gut. You're doing it again, she whispered. Doing what? Letting the wolf take the lead. She tried to look away, but Kavi was faster. He reached out and snatched the phone from her hand, tossing it onto the armchair. The movement brought him deep into her personal space. The scent of her, vanilla and something uniquely Liora, clouded his senses. He wanted to claim her, to mark her so clearly that the rest of the world would know she was off limits. "I'm right here, Liora," he said, his voice thick. "Look at me. Not the screen. Not the past. Just me." He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. For a heartbeat, she leaned into his palm. Her skin was warm, and the contact sent a tremor through his hand. His heart, usually a steady, cold engine of logic, stuttered in his chest. It wasn't just the alpha's instinct. It was something sharper, something that felt dangerously like a need. Then, the warmth vanished. Liora yanked herself back, her eyes narrowing into a glare that burned with sudden tears. "No, Kavi. Stop. Just stop it." Kavi froze, his hand hanging in empty air. "Liora, calm down. You're agitated because..." "I'm agitated because of you," she hissed, her voice shaking. "I've had enough of this. I've had enough of you toying with me like I'm some toy you only remember when you're bored or triggered." "The boundaries of our arrangement are clear," Kavi said, his voice hardening as he tried to regain control of the room. "They are what I say they are. The boundaries are a mess because you keep crossing them." Liora stood up, her chest heaving as she faced him down. "I'm a person, Kavi. I have feelings. I'm not a pawn in your game with Carmel, and I'm certainly not a backup plan for when your other options are busy." Kavi frowned, his confusion genuine. "Other options? What are you talking about?" "I'm too prim and proper for you, remember," she spat, the words hitting him like a physical blow. "You said it yourself." The room went silent. The memory hit Kavi like a freight train, shattering the foggy wall in his mind. The night in the office. The heat, the blurred vision, the drugged haze. He remembered the feel of her lips, the way she had come to him when he was at his weakest, and the cruel, biting words he had thrown at her while his mind was lost to the toxins in his system. He had thought it was a dream. He had convinced himself it was Yala or some nameless distraction. But it had been Liora. She had seen him like that, had tried to help him, and he had insulted her very soul. "Liora." Kavi's voice was barely a whisper. He took a step back, the guilt settling in his stomach like lead. He looked down at his hand and realized he was still clutching his glass. With a sharp crack, the crystal shattered. Shards fell to the carpet, but he didn't feel the sting of the cuts on his palm. He was too busy looking at the woman standing in front of him, the woman he had claimed to protect, yet had wounded more than any enemy could. "I didn't realize. I thought." "That's the problem, Kavi. You don't think about how your actions affect anyone else." Liora stepped around him, her movements jerky and determined. "Go back to your office. Go back to Yala. Go anywhere else." "Wait," Kavi said, reaching for her arm, but she flinched away. "I am done being your convenience," she said, her voice breaking as she reached the bathroom door. She paused, looking back at him one last time with eyes that were cold and wet with unshed tears. "Save your needs for someone who actually wants them. Because I am telling you right now, I will never be yours." The bathroom door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. Kavi stood alone among the broken glass, the growl in his chest turning into a hollow ache. "Liora, open the door," he called out, but only silence answered him. "I thought you said we were playing the perfect couple today," Liora said, her voice tight as she watched Kavi lean against the doorframe. Kavi did not look at her. He toyed with his silk tie, his damp hair messy from a morning shower. He looked tired. He looked like he had spent the night at the bottom of a bottle. "The old man is here. He wants everyone at the table for breakfast. Now." Liora sat up in the large, cold bed. Every movement sent a spike of heat through her bandaged hand. The hospital meds had worn off hours ago. Now, she felt every inch of the damage from her fall. She didn't let him see her wince. She refused to give him that satisfaction. "Where did you go last night?" she asked. "The bar," he muttered. He finally glanced at her, but his eyes were guarded. He wasn't acting like the usual, arrogant Kavi. He looked cautious. It was a strange look on a man who usually broke every rule he made. Before she could press him, a high-pitched shout echoed through the hallway. "Mommy!" The bedroom door burst open. Joel charged inside like a tiny whirlwind. Liora forgot about her pain and her husband in a heartbeat. She opened her arms and caught her son, pulling him into a tight embrace. She peppered his chubby cheeks with kisses until he giggled and squirmed. "No kissy," Joel whined, though he was smiling wide. "I missed you so much," Liora whispered into his hair. The knots in her chest finally loosened. Being away from him during this vacation had been a nightmare. She hated the idea that being part of the Elon family meant Joel would be used as a pawn. She squeezed him one last time, careful not to put pressure on her injured hand. "Go to Daddy for a second, okay?" "I need to get ready," she told the boy. Joel skipped over to Kavi. The tall man crouched down to pick up the boy, his expression softening only for a split second. Liora watched them for a moment before heading into the bathroom. She didn't have time to dwell on Kavi's strange mood. If Grandfather Elon was here this early, the peace at the lake house was officially over. Underscore 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 underscore. 30 minutes later, Liora walked down the grand staircase. The silence of the house had been replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. She reached the dining room and paused. The seating arrangement told the whole story. Grandfather Elon sat at the head of the long table like a king on a throne. Kavi and Alpha Melek sat on either side of him. Carmel and Ziva were further down the table, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. Liora noticed Ziva immediately. Her eyes were red and puffy. She had clearly spent the night crying. Carmel looked beyond annoyed. He stared at his empty plate, his jaw tight. Whatever had been revealed the night before had clearly fractured the family even further. Kavi stood up as Liora approached. He pulled out the chair next to him with practiced grace. To anyone else, it looked like a sweet, husbandly gesture. Liora knew better. It was a performance. "Where is Joel?" Liora whispered as she sat down. "Mora has him in the next room," Kavi replied. His voice was low and robotic. Liora glanced toward the door, her heart sinking. She didn't like her son being near this much toxicity. Her stomach growled, a reminder that she hadn't eaten since the accident. She hoped for a quiet meal, but the way Grandfather Elon gripped his silver fork suggested otherwise. The old man cleared his throat. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. He straightened his back and looked at every person at the table with cold, calculating eyes. "It seems to me some big changes are now unavoidable," Grandfather Elon said. Liora felt Kavi stiffen beside her. She kept her eyes on her plate, her pulse quickening. "We need to talk about the succession," the old man continued. "And the lies that have been told in this house." Melek shifted in his seat. "Father, perhaps we should eat first. The children are tired." "The children are the problem," the old man snapped. He turned his gaze toward Carmel and Ziva. "I heard what happened last night. I heard the accusations. If the bloodline is in question, then the title is in question." Ziva let out a small, broken sob. Carmel slammed his hand onto the table, making the silverware rattle. "This isn't the time for this," Carmel growled. "It is exactly the time," Grandfather Elon replied. "Kavi has shown he can lead. He has shown he can keep his house in order while yours falls apart, Carmel." Liora felt a chill run down her spine. This was what Kavi wanted. He wanted the power. But the cost was becoming higher than she ever expected. She looked at Kavi, expecting to see a smug grin. Instead, he looked pale. "I don't want to hear about the past," the old man said, leaning forward. "I want to know who is loyal to the Elon name. Because by the end of this day, one of you will be stripped of your standing." Liora reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. She realized then that this wasn't just a family breakfast. It was a trial. And she was sitting right in the middle of the blast zone. "Grandfather," Kavi said, his voice finding its edge again. "Let's not be hasty. There are things you don't know yet." The old man laughed, a dry and bitter sound. "I know everything I need to know, Kavi. I know about the girl. I know about the debt. And I know why you really married Liora." Liora froze. She turned her head slowly to look at Kavi. His mask finally slipped, revealing a flash of pure panic. "What is he talking about, Kavi?" Liora asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kavi didn't answer. He stared at his grandfather with a look of betrayal. The old man smiled thinly. "Tell her, Kavi. Tell her the real reason she is sitting at this table." "Changes?" Carmel asked. He dropped his fork, the metal clattering against the ceramic plate. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" He looked up from his breakfast, his eyes darting between Kavi and their grandfather. Suspicion clouded his face. Liora sat perfectly still, her heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She had a sinking feeling she knew exactly where this was going. Grandfather Elon didn't appreciate the interruption. His eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice steady and cold. He didn't even look at Carmel as he spoke. "The Alpha Summit starts in a few days," the old man said, gesturing toward Alpha Melek. "Melek and Shira have worked tirelessly to prepare for this. We cannot afford a scandal right now." He paused, letting the weight of his displeasure hang over the table. Ziva shifted in her seat, her face pale. "The summit requires the Alpha and Luna of the Elon pack to make several public appearances," grandfather continued. "Since Ziva is currently caught up in a police investigation, she is a liability." "But grandfather," Ziva started, her eyes widening. A single, sharp glare from the patriarch cut her off mid-sentence. She snapped her mouth shut, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her napkin. "She can no longer perform the duties of the Luna," he finished firmly. Then, his gaze shifted. He looked directly at Liora. Liora, however, still has a flawless reputation. She knows the protocols. She knows the people. She will stand in as Luna Elon for the duration of the summit. The dining room went silent. Liora felt like the air had been sucked out of the lungs of everyone in the room. She glanced at Kavi, expecting a flare of temper or a sarcastic remark. Instead, he just leaned back and chewed a piece of bacon, his expression completely blank. "I've been the Luna for 3 years, Ziva said, her voice dropping into that soft, sugary tone she used when she wanted to play the victim. "The other Lunas know me. Liora hasn't been in that world for a long time. I'm just worried she will find it hard to adjust." Grandfather Elon didn't blink. Liora was also the Luna for 3 years. "In terms of actual expertise, she still surpasses you. That has been proven by how much negative media attention you've brought to this family lately." Liora bit her lip. They were talking about her like she was a piece of furniture being moved from one room to another. She looked at Carmel. He was still the Alpha. If she stepped in as Luna, it meant they would have to be together. They would have to stand side by side, smiling for the cameras, perhaps even holding hands to sell the lie. She looked at Kavi again. Usually, he hated the idea of her being near his brother. But today, he looked bored. He planned this, Liora realized. The thought hit her like a physical blow. Kavi had exposed Ziva's lies knowing it would create this exact vacancy. He was pushing her back toward Carmel. Was she just a tool to him? A piece of bait to keep his brother distracted? "The other Lunas always liked Liora," Shira added, breaking the tension with a small, supportive smile. They'll be happy to see her back. I don't think there will be any issues. Grandfather Elon hummed. Kavi? Liora? Is this arrangement doable for both of you? Liora held her breath, waiting for Kavi to say something, anything, that showed he cared. I have business with the other alphas to attend to, Kavi said, his voice sounding distant. He finally set his fork down. As for the event, Liora knows what she's doing. She won't have trouble. He didn't look at her. Not once. Liora felt a surge of cold anger. If he wanted to play this game, she would play it. She turned to her grandfather and gave a sharp, decisive nod. I'll do it, she said. She could feel Ziva's glare burning into the side of her head, but she didn't care. She was too busy trying to figure out why Kavi was acting like a stranger. Ever since her confession the night before, ever since she admitted how much he affected her, he had turned into ice. It's settled, grandfather said. There is a hunting competition for the alphas at noon. Liora, you will accompany Carmel. He then turned his gaze back to Ziva. As for you, prepare to return to Tura. You need to look after your daughter. Ziva's mouth hung open. She turned to Carmel, desperate for him to defend her, but he was already pushing his chair back. If that's everything, I have calls to make, Carmel said. He stopped near Liora's chair, his shadow falling over her. I'll pick you up in 2 hours. He walked out without waiting for an answer. Kavi followed shortly after, leaving Liora alone with her thoughts. She didn't stay long. She hurried to the next room to find Joel. The little boy was curled up on a large ottoman, fast asleep. Mora sat nearby, quietly slicing fruit for him. The travel wore him out, Mora whispered. Liora nodded and carefully scooped her son into her arms. She carried him upstairs to their suite, her mind racing. When she entered the room, she found Kavi standing in front of the full-length mirror, tightening his tie. I'll watch him today, Kavi said, his back still turned to her. Bring him to my office before you leave with Carmel. Liora set Joel down on the bed and tucked him in. She stood up and crossed her arms, staring at Kavi's reflection. Are we really going to pretend like that didn't just happen? She asked. Kavi didn't stop adjusting his tie. You mean me granting your wish? Liora let out a sharp, dry laugh. My wish? What are you talking about? You're back where you belong, Liora. Beside the alpha, he said, his voice clipped. If it wasn't for you, I would never have seen Carmel again, she reminded him, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. You forced me to stay. You used my son to keep me here. This wasn't my choice, Kavi. It was yours. He finally stopped moving. His brows twitched, a tiny crack in his mask of indifference. My wish? Liora whispered, stepping closer. No. This is your plan. It's always been about what you want. Don't you dare blame me for it. Kavi turned around, his eyes dark and unreadable. He looked at her for a long moment, then grabbed his jacket from the bed. Don't be late for your date with my brother, he said. You ready to get this over with? Carmel asked as the car rolled to a stop. Liora didn't answer right away. She just stared out the window at the entrance of Greenview Woods. The private hunting grounds looked cold and unforgiving. It belonged to one of the alphas attending the summit, a place designed for men to prove their dominance over nature. To Liora, it just looked like a long day of pretending. She pushed the door open before Carmel could reach for the handle. Her boots sank into the fresh layer of white powder covering the ground. The air was sharp, biting at her skin the moment she stepped out. Carmel stepped to her side, his brow furrowing when he realized she hadn't waited for him to play the gentleman. He didn't say a word. He just gave her space. The others are already here, Carmel noted, nodding toward the line of luxury SUVs parked at the edge of the trees. Liora could hear them. The deep, booming laughter of alphas echoed through the trees, mixed with the sharp scent of pine and distant wood smoke. A gust of wind caught her hair, and she suppressed a shiver. She hated the idea of hunting for sport in a snowstorm. It wasn't about the hike or the animals. It was a power play. A way for these men to remind everyone who was the predator and who was the prey. Just follow the path, Carmel said softly. He walked beside her, his presence heavy and familiar. Liora kept her eyes on the snow. She wanted to be home. She wanted to be sitting on the rug with Joel, away from the politics and the heavy silence of the man walking next to her. Since the hospital, things between them felt like a stretched wire ready to snap. There was too much history, too many things left unsaid, and way too much of Ziva's ghost lingering between them. Watch your step, Carmel warned. He pointed to a narrow, steep trail leading deeper into the brush. It gets slippery here. Liora felt a flicker of bitterness. He was always like this. He was attentive. He was careful. Before everything fell apart, before Ziva had systematically dismantled their marriage, Carmel had been the perfect partner. He was the kind of man who thought 5 steps ahead to make sure she didn't trip. He was a stable father figure for Joel, a stark contrast to the unpredictable fire of someone like Kavi. For a split second, Liora let herself imagine a world where the betrayal never happened. But the thought died quickly. Every time she looked at him, she saw the marks Ziva had left. She remembered the scent of another woman on his skin. He was acting like none of that existed. His hand brushed against hers as they walked. Liora didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She focused on her breathing, her boots thudding rhythmically against the frozen earth. She got distracted by a dark thought and missed her footing. Her boot caught on a hidden shrub, sending her stumbling forward. Easy there, Carmel teased. His arm shot out, catching her firmly around the waist. He held her steady, his eyes bright with a flash of genuine amusement. Save the violence for the hunt, Liora. We just got here. The heat from his palms seeped through her coat. Liora felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. She glared at him, pulling herself out of his grip and tightening her coat around her chest. I'm fine, she snapped. Carmel let out a quiet sigh. He didn't push it. He just fell into step a few paces behind her, letting her lead the way to the rifle shed. As they approached, the smell of the woods changed. The crisp pine was replaced by the metallic tang of gun oil and cold steel. It was an unsettling scent, but Liora forced herself to take a deep breath. She had a role to play today. The shed was a hive of activity. Alphas in heavy hunting gear were checking their scopes and loading magazines. Alpha Elon, one of the men, called out. Carmel stepped forward, sliding back into his role as a leader. He shook hands and exchanged low-muttered greetings with the other men. Liora stood back, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on her. She saw the confusion on their faces. They were looking for Ziva. They were used to seeing the other woman on Carmel's arm, playing the part of the perfect Luna. Liora didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. She nodded politely when necessary, her expression a mask of calm. The Lunas are gathering in the break rooms, a tall alpha said, pointing toward a side door. It's warmer in there. Liora looked at the door. She had zero interest in sitting in a room full of women who would whisper about her divorce behind her back. She didn't want to play the socialite today. Liora will stay with me, Carmel interrupted. She looked at him, surprised by the sudden edge in his voice. He leaned in, his voice dropping so low only she could hear it. You don't have to force yourself to talk to them, he whispered. I know how you feel about these crowds. He turned away before she could respond, heading toward the rack to select a rifle. Liora watched him, her heart heavy. He still remembered her preferences. He still knew what she hated. Don't think this changes anything, Liora said. So, will you also be attending the summit? Hila asked, her voice tilting upward in that way Liora found particularly grating. Liora didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on the uneven forest floor, her boots crunching over dry twigs. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Ahead of them, the pack guides had already released the hounds. The sound of barking dogs echoed through the thick timber, a frantic, rhythmic noise that signaled the start of the hunt. That is a silly question, Kasia chimed in before Liora could respond. Kasia adjusted the strap of her rifle, her eyes scanning the brush. Liora will be there regardless. Between Carmel and Kavi, she is the most relevant person in the room. Hila giggled. It was a high, airy sound that reminded Liora painfully of Ziva. There was no physical resemblance. Hila was a pretty blonde recently married into the Galtimore pack, but the mannerisms were identical. She had the same habit of acting coy and reacting with dramatic flair to the smallest things. The Elon pack has a decent supply of Lunas, doesn't it? Hila said. The comment hung in the air like a bad smell. Nobody laughed. The other women in the group shifted uncomfortably, and Hila eventually fell silent, turning her attention to her own boots. Liora ignored the sting of the remark. She was used to the whispers. Every woman here was likely wondering about the Luna switch, or where Ziva had disappeared to. Rumors about the hottest mall incident had spread like wildfire. These gatherings were never really about the hunt. They were about hunting for weaknesses. Up ahead, the alphas of the top 5 packs moved in a tight cluster. They were here to settle rivalries before the summit began. It was a show of unity for the public, even if they all planned to stab each other in the back once the official meeting started. Carmel stood out among them. Even from a distance, his presence was heavy. He seemed to sense Liora's gaze because he detached himself from a conversation with the other men. He walked back toward her, his rifle held loosely in one hand. Are you sure it is okay to be walking with me? Liora asked as he reached her side. Her voice was flat, devoid of the warmth he seemed to be looking for. You should be up there. You should get the first kill. Carmel shrugged. He didn't look at the other alphas. He only looked at her. I am number 1. I have nothing to prove to them. Liora shook her head. That was the Elon confidence. It was arrogant, but it was also true. Besides, Carmel said, his voice dropping an octave. He stopped walking, forcing her to pause as well. His hands clenched at his sides, his knuckles white against the metal of his gun. I would much rather be right here. Liora felt a flicker of something in her chest, but she pushed it down. She didn't want to analyze his tone. It was too soft. It felt too much like a weight she wasn't ready to carry. She looked away, her eyes landing on the rifle in her own hands to avoid his stare. It is on safety, Carmel whispered, stepping closer. I do not think there will be any need for you to use it today. The guides will handle the heavy lifting. Liora didn't answer. A sharp rustle in the thicket to their left caught her ear. She didn't hesitate. She clicked the safety off with a practiced flick of her thumb. She raised the stock to her shoulder, tucked her cheek against the wood, and exhaled a slow, steady breath. The world narrowed down to the sight. Crack. The gunshot shattered the quiet of the woods. A pheasant tumbled from the brush a few dozen yards away, its wings fluttering once before it went still. Liora lowered the gun. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. Her aim was still perfect. The alphas at the front of the line spun around. Alpha Tau, a longtime friend of the Elon family, let out a low whistle. He nudged his wife, Kezia, who was still struggling with her own gear. Carmel, you didn't mention Liora was such a good shot, Tau called out with a grin. He looked at his wife. Maybe you should take some lessons from her before you accidentally put a hole in me. The men laughed, the tension of the hunt breaking for a moment. Kezia rolled her eyes and strapped her rifle over her shoulder, clearly annoyed. Carmel, however, wasn't laughing. He was staring at Liora, his mouth slightly open as if he'd forgotten what he was about to say. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps a side of his wife he never cared to notice before. You were saying? Liora asked. She shifted the rifle to a more comfortable position, her eyes challenging him. Carmel blinked, coming out of his daze. He tightened his grip on his rifle, his jaw ticking. I did not know you could. Fire a gun? Liora finished for him. She raised a brow, her voice cool. There is a lot you do not know about me, Carmel. Carmel opened his mouth to respond, his forehead furrowed in confusion and something that looked like regret. But before a single word could come out, another shot rang through the trees from the woods ahead. We aren't the only ones hunting today, are we? You need to keep up, or the cold will catch you, Ziva chirps, casting a bright, polished smile back at the group. Liora doesn't bother responding. She just drags her boots through the thickening powder, her feet feeling like lead weights. For over an hour, they have been trekking through the dense pines. The men lead the way, chests puffed out after every kill, their laughter echoing off the frozen trunks. The women trail behind like an afterthought, offering fake laughs and polite nods to keep the peace. Liora zones out. She stops trying to fix her expression. Grandfather Elon ordered her to be a substitute for the event, but he didn't say she had to be a happy one. If word gets back to him that she was a total drag, she can live with that. Ziva, meanwhile, is working the crowd with the skill of a seasoned politician. She moves from person to person, playing the part of the gentle, pure-hearted Luna perfectly. The other women are already eating out of the palm of her hand. Liora watches a clump of snow fall from a branch. She wonders if Ziva set fire to the mall herself just to avoid this walk. There is absolutely nothing fun about watching 5 billionaire alphas pretend they are master trackers. Everyone knows the game was planted at specific locations before they even arrived. It isn't a hunt. It is a stage play. Do you smell that? Carmel's voice breaks her thoughts. He leans in close, his shoulder brushing hers. His nose twitches as he scans the tree line. Liora hasn't spoken to him since the first shot rang out. She hasn't had to. Despite the other alphas trying to pull him into their circle, Carmel has stayed glued to her side. Every time she looks over, she catches him staring. There is a look in his eyes, a heavy, aching longing, that makes her stomach do a slow, uncomfortable flip. She wants to believe it's an act. He's the nice guy, after all. He's probably just following grandfather's orders to keep an eye on her. But as the minutes pass, the sincerity in his face becomes harder to dismiss. It reminds her of their marriage, and that is a door she wants to keep locked and bolted. What smell? Liora asks, her voice flat. The moss? The dirt? The blood on the snow? It smells like a storm, Carmel murmurs. He looks up at the gray, heavy sky. A bad one. We shouldn't be out here when it hits. The storms in these mountains can kill a man in minutes. Oh, give it a rest, Cam. Alpha Tal shouts from a few yards ahead. He doesn't even look back. Dove checked the weather reports 3 times. Clear skies all day. Stop worrying and enjoy the fresh air. Carmel's jaw tightens. He clearly doesn't agree, but he drops the subject as the group enters a wide clearing. It isn't a campsite, it's a luxury lounge built of logs and glass. A wooden shack sits at the edge of the woods with a grill already smoking. A team of professional chefs stands ready, wearing white coats that look absurd against the rugged backdrop. Sit down, Carmel says, guiding Liora toward a lounge chair. He hands her a bottle of water. I noticed you're slowing down. You're shivering. I'm fine, Carmel. You aren't fine, he says softly. You have to lace your boots tighter at the top. If the snow gets inside, the chill seeps into your bones. Liora rolls her eyes. Look, Cam. She stops when he drops to one knee. Before she can protest, he reaches out and begins unlacing her leather boots. Don't do that, she says, trying to pull her leg back. Carmel's grip is firm but gentle as he catches her ankle and holds it in place. I'm not taking you back with frostbite. I wouldn't be able to explain that to anyone. Liora feels the weight of a dozen stares. People are whispering. Everyone knows they used to be husband and wife. Seeing him kneel at her feet like a devoted servant is sending the rumor mill into overdrive. You're drawing attention, she hisses, leaning down so only he can hear. Stop it. Carmel looks up. His expression is pained, his eyes searching hers. Is that really what you think I'm doing? Looking for a scene? His fingers trail up the side of the boot, brushing against the small patch of bare skin at her ankle. The touch is light, but it feels like a burn. Maybe you're used to people doing things for show because of Kavi, Carmel says, his voice a low drawl. But that isn't me. You know it isn't. With us, it was always different, Aura. Liora flinches at the nickname. Her fists clench at her sides. Don't. Just, don't. She wrenches her leg away. This time, he lets her go. He stays on the ground for a moment, looking at the spot where she was standing as if he's lost something he can't get back. Kavi isn't here. Neither is Ziva, Carmel says, standing up slowly. He doesn't look at the other alphas. He only looks at her. Maybe they shouldn't be here at all. Maybe things should just go back to the way they were. Before them. Liora feels a chill that has nothing to do with the wind. Carmel never talks about Kavi. He usually pretends his brother doesn't exist. Hearing him reminisce about the old days feels dangerous. It feels like a trap. She turns her back on him and walks toward the edge of the trees, needing the silence of the forest to drown out the sound of her own racing heart. Where are you going? Carmel calls out. Somewhere I can breathe, Liora snaps back. Is he serious? Tal yelled, his voice echoing through the clearing. What the hell, man? Liora froze. She had only been away from the group for a few minutes, but the air had shifted. The soft chatter of the pack members was gone, replaced by a thick, vibrating tension. She turned back toward the camp, her brow furrowed. Carmel wasn't one for outbursts. He spent years crafting an image of the cool, level-headed alpha. The only time she had seen him lose control like this was back at the hospital, when the accusations about Kalila were flying. Through the trees, she saw him. Carmel was storming away from Tal, his back a rigid wall of muscle. His fists were white-knuckled at his sides, and even from 20 yards away, Liora could feel the heat of his rage. He didn't look back. He just vanished into the dark line of the forest. The clearing fell into a tomb-like silence. Tal stood in the center of the camp, looking less like a powerful alpha and more like a terrified kid. He held a small silver flask in his hand, staring at the spot where Carmel had disappeared. Liora walked up to him, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. What happened? Tal shook his head, his mouth still hanging open. I don't know. I just wanted him to try the wine Kezia brewed. He took one sip and just snapped. Liora looked at the flask. She didn't ask permission this time, she reached out and took it. She tilted her head back, letting a single drop hit her tongue. The flavor was sweet, tart, and instantly recognizable. Raspberry, Liora whispered, her eyes widening. Yeah, Kezia's special batch, Tal said, sounding confused. Is something wrong? Liora's heart dropped into her stomach. Carmel is severely allergic to berries, Tal. Especially raspberries. She knew that because Joel had the same exact reaction. It was a family trait they couldn't escape. Did he swallow it? Tal turned pale. He nodded slowly. He's just stressed, Liora lied, her voice tight as she tried to keep the panic from spreading to the rest of the pack. We'll be back soon. Just stay here. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and sprinted into the woods. Damn it, Carmel, she hissed under her breath. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the forest in a bruised purple twilight. The tracks in the snow were deep and erratic. Carmel wasn't just walking, he was stumbling. The air was getting colder, and the heavy, metallic scent of an approaching storm hung thick in the breeze. Carmel! Liora shouted. The wind whistled through the pines, but there was no answer. Carmel, I know you can hear me. Stop moving. She pushed through a thicket of frozen brush, her boots sliding in the slush. She stopped, holding her breath to listen. At first, there was nothing. Then, a wet, ragged sound reached her ears. It was the sound of someone struggling for air. Liora broke into a full run. She rounded a massive oak tree and stopped dead. Carmel was slumped against a tree trunk, his legs splayed out in the snow. He was clawing at the collar of his shirt, his chest heaving in violent, shallow jerks. His face was flushed, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. Carmel. Liora dropped to her knees beside him, the snow soaking into her pants instantly. Can you hear me? He didn't look at her. He scrambled backward, his back scraping against the bark as he tried to pull away. He was panicking, his body entering survival mode, unable to recognize friend from foe. It's just me, Liora said, her voice cracking. She reached out and grabbed his wrists, forcing his hands away from his throat. It's Liora. There's no one else here, Carmel. Look at me. He fought her for a second, his strength fading as his lungs restricted. Finally, his hands went limp in her grip. His eyes cleared for a brief second, locking onto hers. Breathe, she commanded. She took his hand and pressed it firmly against her own chest, right over her heart. Feel that? Match me. Breathe with me. Carmel let out a hoarse, strangled gasp. It sounded painful, but a small amount of air made it through. That's it, she whispered, blinking back tears. I'm right here. I'm not leaving you. They sat there in the snow for what felt like hours. Slowly, the violent wheezing slowed to a heavy pant. The tension left his frame, and he slumped forward, resting his forehead against her shoulder. His skin was clammy, but the immediate danger of his throat closing seemed to have passed. Liora didn't pull away. She hated him. She had spent every day for 3 years telling herself that he deserved the worst the world had to offer. She told herself that if he ever went down, she would be the one to watch him fall. But looking at him now, so broken and vulnerable, the hate felt heavy and useless. Ora, he croaked. His voice was a shredded ruin. Don't talk, she said, her voice soft. Just rest. I'm sorry, he whispered, ignoring her. He leaned more weight into her. For everything. I regretted it the second you left. I looked for you. I swear, I looked everywhere, but you were just gone. Liora looked up at the darkening sky. The first few flakes of snow began to fall. I thought the regret was all I had left, Carmel continued, his breath warm against her neck. But seeing you now, having you within reach. I can't help it. I keep wanting things I don't deserve. Leora's heart tightened. These were the exact words she had prayed for 3 years ago. She would have given anything to hear this back then. But time had a way of turning silver linings into lead. Carmel pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. His expression was raw, stripped of all alpha pride. Can't you just come back to me? You wish, Liora muttered, her voice barely rising above the rustle of the surrounding trees. Carmel didn't push back. Instead, he gave a casual shrug that looked far too relaxed for a man who had just survived a life-threatening allergic reaction. I do, he admitted. He didn't blink or look away. He just stood there, waiting for her reaction. Liora felt the heat rise to her cheeks and quickly turned her head. She focused on a patch of moss just to avoid the intensity in his eyes. The tension from the boardroom, the cold, professional wall they had built between them, was crumbling. It made her skin crawl with a mix of nerves and something she didn't want to name. We should head back now, she said firmly. Carmel nodded and reached out. He offered her his hand with a small, knowing smile. Liora didn't even look at his palm. She raised a skeptical brow, ignored the gesture, and pushed herself up from the damp log. A quiet chuckle escaped him, but he didn't seem offended. He simply turned and began leading the way through the thick brush. I texted Tal, Carmel said over his shoulder as they walked. I told him we're heading back on our own. Liora followed behind him, her boots crunching on the dry earth. She nodded to his back, though she wasn't sure if he could see her. The forest was changing. The deep, earthy scent of pine was being replaced by a sharp, metallic bite in the air. Above the canopy, the sky shifted from a dusky gray to an unnatural, bruised purple. The first flake of snow hit her cheek. It was tiny and harmless, but the air temperature plummeted in seconds. "We should hurry," Carmel said. His casual tone was gone, replaced by the sharp authority of a man used to command. He looked up at the swaying branches. Within minutes, the light dusting turned into a white wall. A freezing wind tore through the trees with a scream, shaking the timber. Liora pulled her fur coat tighter, but the chill sliced right through the layers. The ground, once clear, was rapidly disappearing under a layer of white. "Just keep walking, Liora," Carmel shouted over the roar of the wind. "The clearing is close. Once we hit that, the exit is only a few minutes away." Liora squinted, shielding her eyes from the ice crystals stinging her skin. She focused on the dark shape of Carmel's back, following his heavy footsteps in the rising snow. The wind gave a violent heave, throwing a cloud of white powder into her face. She blinked, wiping her eyes, and when she looked up again, the world was empty. "Carmel," she called out. The wind swallowed her voice. She turned in a circle, her heart starting to drum against her ribs. There was no dark coat in the distance. No heavy footsteps. Just the screaming gale and the endless, blurring white. "Carmel," she screamed louder, her throat raw. Silence followed, save for the howling storm. Panic, cold and sharp, crawled up her spine. She was in the middle of a forest she didn't know, in a city she didn't live in, caught in a freak blizzard. Her rifle was back at the clearing. Her phone felt like a block of ice in her pocket. She thought of Joel. The image of her son's face hit her like a physical blow. He was miles away, waiting for her, and she was standing in a frozen graveyard. "I have to get back," she whispered to herself. "I have to get to Joel." She pushed forward, her legs feeling like lead. Every step was a battle against the wind. Her hair, damp from the melting flakes, froze against her cheeks. Her stomach twisted with a sharp hunger pang, reminding her she hadn't eaten since dawn. She had skipped breakfast to deal with Carmel's crisis, and now the man had vanished into the white. Liora took a heavy step forward, but her boot caught on a hidden root. She gasped as her balance went. She pitched forward, face-planting into a drift of freezing powder. The shock of the cold took her breath away. She scrambled to her feet, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt. She wiped her mouth and felt something warm. Her fingers came away stained with red. She had bitten her lip in the fall. She stood there, shivering and bleeding, looking at a world that had no landmarks left. She didn't know which way was north. She didn't know if she was walking towards safety or deeper into the heart of the woods. "Can this day get any worse?" she muttered, her voice cracking as the wind tried to knock her down again. "Liora. Answer me." The voice sliced through the screaming wind. It was deep and rough. Liora knew that voice better than her own heartbeat. She jerked her head up. Snow stung her eyes like tiny needles. Through the white blur, a shape took form. It was Kavi. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead and dusted with ice. He looked like a ghost emerging from the storm. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man ready to tear the world apart. Liora felt a wave of relief so strong it made her knees wobble. She wanted to cry, but her face was too frozen to move. Kavi didn't say anything sweet. He stormed forward and grabbed her arm. His grip was tight and steady. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he snapped. Liora tried to answer, but her teeth were clicking together. She sounded like a broken toy. Kavi didn't wait for an explanation. He yanked her against his chest. He popped his heavy coat open and tucked her inside. The heat hit her instantly. He smelled like wood smoke and cold earth. Liora knew she should pull away. She knew she would regret leaning into him later. But right now, she was dying of cold, and he was a furnace. She let her head drop against his shoulder. "Stay close," Kavi growled. He didn't give her a choice. He wrapped an arm around her waist like a band of steel. He started moving through the drifts. He was huge and solid, blocking the worst of the wind. Liora stumbled, her boots sinking deep into the powder. Every time she tripped, Kavi caught her weight. He didn't slow down. He marched through the blizzard like it didn't exist. Almost there, he muttered. His hot breath brushed her temple. Finally, a dark shape appeared in the whiteout. It was a cabin. The wood was gray and rotting, but it had a roof. Kavi kicked the door open with his shoulder. He pulled Liora inside and slammed the door shut. The silence was sudden. It was heavy. The only sound was the whistle of the wind through the cracks and their own loud breathing. The room was dark, lit only by the faint gray light coming through the shutters. Liora's legs finally gave out. She started to slide down the wall, but Kavi caught her. He didn't let her go. Instead, he pinned her against the wood. His hand stayed on her shoulders. He was scanning her face, looking for cuts or frostbite. His eyes were wild. "You're shaking," he said. His voice was low and dangerous. "I'm just cold," Liora whispered back. She tried to sound brave, but her voice cracked. "I'm not dead yet." "Are you disappointed?" Kavi's jaw tightened. He leaned in until their noses almost touched. His heat was overwhelming in the small space. "You could have been." Liora felt trapped. She was caged between the wall and his massive frame. She couldn't even look away. The rage in his eyes was terrifying, but there was something else there, too. It was a dark, possessive hunger. "I'll kill him," Kavi said. He gave a short, dark laugh that made the hair on her neck stand up. "I will rip him apart limb from limb." Liora didn't have to ask who he meant. Carmel. The man who had promised to help her and then vanished into the snow. A sting of hurt went through her. Carmel had left her to die. But as she looked at Kavi, her fear turned into a sharp, biting anger. "Whose fault is this, Kavi?" she barked. She pushed against his chest, but he didn't move an inch. "Who sent me out here? Who forced me into this game?" Kavi's brow twitched. "You don't get to play the hero now," Liora shouted. Her voice broke, and she blinked back hot tears. "You're my husband. Not him. You were supposed to keep me safe. You, Kavi. Not some stranger." The air in the cabin turned heavy. Kavi didn't flinch. He just stared at her. For the first time, he wasn't looking at her like a legal problem or a business deal. He wasn't looking at her like a burden he had to carry. He was looking at her like she belonged to him. Completely. Absolutely. Liora hated it. She hated how her heart hammered against her ribs. She hated how safe she felt even while she was yelling at him. Most of all, she hated that he was the only thing keeping her warm. "Is that what you want?" Kavi asked. His voice was a low rumble in his chest. "You want me to be the one who owns you?" Liora glared at him, her chest heaving. "I want you to be a man of your word." Kavi leaned even closer. His hand slid from her shoulder to the back of her neck. His thumb brushed the skin just under her ear. It felt like a brand. "Careful, Liora," he whispered. "If I start protecting you, I'm never letting you go again." "Don't look at me like that," Liora whispered. She tried to find a way out of his gaze, but Kavi's eyes held her captive. He wasn't just looking at her. He was looking through her, searching for something hidden deep inside. Liora ripped her eyes away with a sharp breath. She focused on the snow dripping off her coat. It pooled around their boots in a dark, messy puddle. Usually, Kavi was great at reading the room. He knew when a moment ended. He knew when to give her space. This time, he didn't move. He stayed right there, a wall of heat against the cabin's chill. The silence between them felt heavier than the timber beams of the roof. Outside, the wind howled, but the quiet inside was louder. Liora struggled to draw a full breath. The air tasted like wood smoke and Kavi's scent. A violent shiver racked her body. She couldn't stop it. That shiver finally broke his trance. Kavi didn't let go immediately, though. His hand stayed firm on her shoulders. He held her like he was afraid she might vanish into the shadows of the room if he loosened his grip. Liora almost wished she could. But the storm outside was a monster. She didn't have a death wish, and leaving meant facing the whiteout alone. Kavi dragged a hand through his damp hair. He stepped back just an inch. His coat still brushed hers. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A low curse escaped his lips. "No reception," Kavi said. "The towers must be down. We are stuck here for a while." Liora's stomach did a slow, painful flip. "Joel is out there. He needs me." Kavi's head snapped up. He saw her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. Before she could pull away, he reached out. He gently pried her fingers open with his thumb. "Liora, look at me," he said. His voice was steady and low. "He is fine. You know I would never let anything happen to him." "My granddad is with him," Liora said, trying to convince herself more than him. "Mora and Shira are there too." Kavi squeezed her hand once. It felt like an instinct, a reflex he couldn't hide. Then he let go and moved across the room. He moved with a purpose that Liora couldn't help but admire. He scanned the corners of the cabin like a soldier clearing a room. He found a stack of dry wood near the hearth. Within minutes, he had a fire roaring. Liora stayed by the door. Her feet felt like they were made of lead. The orange glow of the fire began to crawl across the floor. It licked at her skin, bringing a stinging heat back to her numb fingers. "Sit down," Kavi commanded. He pointed to an old, sagging sofa near the fire. His tone was sharp. It didn't leave any room for a fight. Liora wanted to argue just to prove she could. Her shaking legs betrayed her, though. She sank into the cushions and hugged her knees to her chest. Kavi didn't stop moving. He shook out a few old blankets and checked the window latches. He was making sure the storm stayed on the other side of the glass. He was efficient. He was controlled. That was the Kavi she knew. But there was something else in his movements. He was being careful with her. There was no audience here. No cameras. No family members to impress with a show of a happy marriage. He was doing this because he wanted to. "Who are you right now?" Liora wondered silently. She had spent so long watching him play the part of a husband that she forgot he might actually be one. Kavi knelt on the floor in front of her. He draped a heavy wool blanket over her shoulders. He tucked the edges around her as if she were a child. His fingers brushed her cheek. He let them stay there for a second too long. He was checking her temperature, but the touch felt like electricity. His jaw tightened when he felt how cold she still was. "You need to change your clothes," Kavi said. His eyes dropped to her soaked sweater and then snapped back to the fire. "Wet fabric will give you hypothermia. You won't get warm like that." Liora stiffened. She looked around the small, open room. There was no bathroom. No divider. No privacy. The idea of him watching her undress made her heart hammer against her ribs. "I'll be fine," she said. She pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Stop fussing over me." Kavi's lips tilted into a small, dark smile. "You always hated it when I fussed. But I can't stop, Liora. Not when it's you." The words hit her like a physical weight. Kavi stood up and turned his back to her. He walked toward the window to give her some version of privacy. Liora watched the tension in his shoulders. His hands curled into fists at his sides. He looked like a man trying very hard not to turn around. Liora moved fast. She peeled off the heavy, wet layers and kicked them into a pile. She stood there in the flickering firelight, her skin goose-fleshed and pale. She wrapped the blanket tight around her body and sat back on the sofa. You can look now, she murmured. Kavi turned around. His eyes swept over her, checking to see if she was covered. He nodded once and sat on the opposite end of the long sofa. He didn't try to touch her again. He just watched the flames. The fire crackled, popping as the wood settled. Liora felt her body warming up, but her mind was spinning. She should feel safe. She should feel relieved to be out of the snow. Instead, she felt like she was in a different kind of danger. Kavi sat there like a predator trying to pretend he was a protector. He kept stealing glances at her. Do you think the roads will be clear by morning? Liora asked. Kavi leaned back. The firelight carved deep shadows into his face. Maybe. Or maybe the storm wants us to stay right here. Liora pulled the blanket tighter. Why would you say that? Because out there, the world tells us who to be, Kavi said. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. In here, it's just us. No lies. No scripts. Liora looked at the fire. She couldn't shake the feeling that Kavi wasn't upset about being stranded. He looked like a man who finally had exactly what he wanted. Is that what this is to you? Liora asked. A chance to play house without an audience? Kavi leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. Is that really what you think I'm doing? You've been staring for a while, Liora said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence of the room. If you have something to say, just say it. Kavi didn't move. He couldn't. He sat across from her, watching the way the lamplight caught the damp strands of her hair. She was a mess. Her usual perfection was gone, replaced by frizzled curls and skin that still shimmered from the rain. She looked small, wrapped in a thick blanket that she pulled tight around her shoulders, but her eyes were narrowed in a glare that could melt steel. She wasn't looking at him. She was glaring at the wall, at the floor, at anything but him. Kavi knew she was fuming. She wasn't thinking about Carmel right now. She wasn't thinking about the husband who had failed to protect her or the vows he'd broken. She was focused entirely on the man sitting 3 feet away, and Kavi didn't mind being the target of her anger one bit. I'm waiting, Kavi, she snapped, her chest rising and falling in a rapid, jagged rhythm. The movement of the blanket caught his eye. Every inhale she took seemed to pulse through the room. Kavi felt his pulse thrumming in his neck. He had promised her boundaries. He had told himself he would stay on his side of the line. But watching her shiver, seeing the way her hand twitched against her lap, he felt those promises dissolving like salt in the rain.